years of just restriction and taboo and shame and guilt. And we have to go through the wave of a lot of people, like you said, have gone through the extremes of sexual expressions and they don't make smart choices.
Hi, my name is Yana. Thank you for watching. This episode starts with an audio introduction and continues with the video content. So remember to watch it until the end. And subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, share with friends. Thank you for being here and listening to Timeless Teachings. Welcome to the world of consciousness, human development, and full potential. Here we have conversations with people from all over the world about the subjects that matter for our mind, body, and soul, so that you can create a truly spectacular life. It is all about weaving the sacred, the soulful, and the ordinary into our everyday existence. Inhale, exhale, and let's begin. This is Timeless Teachings, a global podcast with yanafry. Today, we are going to look at a truly hot subject and ask questions like, what is sexual wellness? How to become a better lover? Why porn is not a sexual education? Why do women often feel pain during a sexual experience and how to heal it? What are sexual traumas of men, cliches about self-pleasure and cultural conditioning? And in the current hookup and dating culture, how can we all be more grown up and mature about it? Our guest today is Christina Antonyan. She is the founder of Confident Lovers. Christina has lived in 5 countries, traveled to over 60 countries, and for the last 16 years, she has been teaching and studying sexual wellness around the world. Let's welcome Christina. Christina, thank you very much for joining us here today on Timeless Teachings.
Thank you so much. We finally made it. We've been planning this for so long and couldn't get the dates and times to work.
All the way from, San Francisco to Singapore. So here we are finally having a conversation about sex. And I'm so excited to talk about it today.
Me too. It's my favorite topic.
So tell us, I know you and I know who you are and I know why the reason I invited you to talk about it today, but I'm sure people who will be listening, some of them don't know. So share with us, who is Christina?
Who is Christina? Christina's driving force is actually curiosity. And I love asking questions. And that's how I kind of shape the world around me. So when I was 3 years old, I realized that through my body, I was able to gain a lot of knowledge about the world from self-pleasure. And I didn't think anything was wrong with that. And throughout the years, of course, my lovely mother who punished me for touching myself, that developed into other curiosities throughout the years. And this is kind of how I started Confident Lover in the beginning, I realized I did some online and offline market search to see how did people learn about sexuality. And there was really only 2 resources for men, particularly. I was asking this question, and it was either porn or the pickup artist community, neither one of which do justice or service, right? And I said, wow, so there's really,
Not a proper education.
Because it's not education, it's entertainment more than anything. And I said, so there's really nothing out there that teaches men about the fascinating and mysterious nature of female sexuality. And the people who are teaching this topic are men teaching to other men. A woman's voice is missing in the conversation. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to do something about this. And that's kind of was the start of Confident Lover. And then over time, I realized that no, actually women need this information too. And a lot of the topics that I was writing about, reading it. And women were constantly asking me questions. And I realized that I need to segue into talking to both men and women about this topic. And this is kind of how Confident Lovers was born. So I ended up living in 5 countries so far. I'm looking for my 6th country or place to call home. It's not San Francisco. I've traveled to over 60 countries, learning, teaching everything about sexuality to just kind of really understand where the collective consciousness is around this topic and what do we need to share? How do we start? What's the maturity level about this topic? And just to gain some insight and knowledge to be able to better serve others, to free them from shame, guilt, anxiety, pain, fear, because there's just so much of that around sexuality. And what type of conversations can we have globally to normalize what should already be normal?
Those are all huge topics. So let's start somewhere and see what can we illuminate during the conversation we have today with all this travel and research you have done and people you worked with.
Yes.
Start with the question, what do you see is happening in the collective consciousness when it comes to sexuality?
There's actually a lot of fear. There's a lot of the unknown. There's a lot of shame around sexuality. There's a lot of guilt around sexuality. A ton of trauma on both sides. I know we talk a lot about sexual trauma when it comes to women, but my God, I've heard so many incredible stories that men have also experienced sexual trauma in their childhood years. So that's definitely one conversation that's not getting enough light in terms of the sexual trauma that men have experienced. And it's just overall, it's a very, I want to say, I would love to get it to a point where we have mature conversations about sexuality, where it's not just, we don't keep it, the superficial conversations about what you see in Cosmo magazines and just, all that, like 10 ways how to please a man, and it's like nothing useful, or just very superficial conversations.
And 10 ways how to please a woman, right? So
yes, exactly, right. But to really have like the type of conversations where it's going to shift someone's perspective and have them ask questions because they're finally able to have a medium where they can comfortably talk about sexuality. I think I told you this story when I was once in Singapore looking for a co-working space when I was living there. And I went into, because I went through like 10 of them. And the lady asked, so what do you do? I said, what space are you in? And I said, in sexual wellness. And she said, oh, let's move over there where there's nobody sitting there so we can talk about this. I said, why can't we just talk about it here?
Just here, right?
So it's that kind of, it's those type of conversations. And really, like, porn has become the default sexual education. That's what I'm also seeing in the collective consciousness. And I will be the first among porn stars will be the first to tell you that this is not sexual education. This is purely for entertainment. However, where do people go to learn about sex? Porn at a very young age. And that becomes kind of like, it completely takes over our consciousness in terms of what sex is supposed to be versus the type of sex that we're experiencing with our lovers.
So what can we do about that in the reality with everything where
it's to turn off porn?
Turn off porn. Okay.
Turn off porn. Don't understand that there's a difference between sexual entertainment and education, and porn is not education. And when you actually watch, but seriously, when we say watch porn, it's not just watching porn. Most people don't just sit there and watch porn like you watch a movie. You don't watch porn, you masturbate to porn, which means you're masturbating to a screen of two people having sex, right? So it's not, yes, you're watching it because your eyes are seeing this, but you also have to understand what happens in the brain when you're constantly giving your attention to that. It actually hijacks your brain. Because if anyone, and most people are not even aware of this, I love doing or asking people questions like, do you replay porn scenes in your head when you're masturbating and not watching porn to be able to have an orgasm? And is your orgasm dependent on watching porn? Can you have an orgasm without any kind of anything? And the answer oftentimes is no.
Mm.
For the people who have come accustomed to watching porn to be able to have an orgasm. That's kind of the same way for women who have become accustomed to using vibrators to be able to have an orgasm. Can they have an orgasm without a vibrator? Has it become, is it supplementary, or has it become the primary source of your orgasm?
Well, which brings us then to the sex education. And I feel that particularly, I think in our generation, that's now becoming more and more of an important topic. And there are more people who are curious about it and starting having these conversations and opening up to that. So when you work with people, is there like a common questions that people ask? Is there something that both like men and women really would like to know?
Yes, oftentimes they want to know how can they be a better lover? And my answer to that is always a question. How do you know you're not a good lover to begin with? And oftentimes they don't really, it's never a question that they thought about. They just know that they're not good. Or sometimes they know that they're good, and they just need something more to just either know more about their body, either know more about their partner's bodies to become better. And this is where a lot of the conversations and blogs and videos, whatever else I record, is mainly geared towards that, right? And it's to help people. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. It's I'm going to just look at it, and also it becomes like any other area of our life. Like people want be healthier. They want to be happier. They want to be more successful professionally, or happier within the family, or like something else. And as a part of life, they want to be better lovers, which is all just more better at sex, whatever that means for each person. And at the same time, and I think you and I, we spoke about it, when we look at the world, you could see that according to the country, there's almost like a different level to this conversation. And some countries are a bit more open and it's a bit more okay to talk about it. Like America is definitely, a bit more okay to talk about it. And let's say Asia.
Versus Singapore.
Well, exactly. And Singapore is probably not at all,
You'll be surprised. It's changing. You will definitely be surprised.
I know it does, because I see it around. Absolutely. Yes. And at the same time, it's just culturally, there are different taboos about different things. And you and I, we spoke about it, right? So it depending also kind of what culture we're born into and where we grew up. And often, like, for example, when I think especially Asian people or Middle East, maybe another example, and then go to maybe more liberal spaces and countries, and when we talk about sex. And for people, it's very often hard to deal with the conditioning from the past. So how do we process it and let go of that? I mean, you and I, we spoke about it.
Well, one of my favorite things to say about the past is leave the past where it belongs. The question that you should be asking yourself is, how do I create a future where my sexuality becomes an addition? It's a part of me. So therefore, how do I want to express it? And how do I go about finding ways to express it in a wholesome way? Not to be, people who come from cultures where the topic is so taboo, they go into other countries and they go from like 0 to 100, right? I don't want to get into the details, but you know what I mean. And at times it ends up hurting themselves because they don't know enough about STDs. They don't know that it could be transmitted, right? There's just so many things that they don't know about. They just want to have fun. And sometimes it becomes irresponsible fun, which then has some very serious consequences. So the funny thing is, a lot of people think that places like America or the UK are these liberal places to talk about sex. And I would say to a certain level, what I've noticed from coming to America a lot and from growing up here is there's a one-liner that came to me about America where war is tolerated, accepted, and talked about. However, a happy ending still remains illegal. Because in most places in America, you have to go to a certain state where prostitution is legal, oftentimes Nevada, but in other places it's not. And if you are caught getting a hand job, you can actually go to jail for that. So, America has this funny dynamic where, yes, they do have conversations about it openly on podcasts and things like this, but oftentimes I don't think it's as open as people think that it is. But here's the funny part. Here's what I noticed historically. No matter where you grew up in the world, and I'm excluding countries like Norway or Finland, because in places like that, I feel like they're way more progressive and they get a proper sexual education just based on the people that I've spoken to compared to the rest of the world. And I'm always amazed at the similarities that each of us have grown up with in terms of the messaging that we've heard from our parents. How many times, and it doesn't matter if you grew up in Italy, it doesn't matter if you grew up in America, Armenia, Russia, Singapore. I mean, some of the messages that we got were all the same. And back then, it's not like they had social media. Like if you keep touching yourself, it's going to fall off. If you keep touching yourself, you're going to go blind. If you keep touching yourself, you're going to grow hair inside of the palms of your hands. I mean, those are just common messages.
My mom never told me that. That explains a lot of things.
Well, your mom never told you that? She was probably one of the progressive ones. That just
Yes,
exactly.
In the area, I grew up in a very progressive household.
Okay, so, lucky you, because I remember my mom telling me that if I kept touching myself, that I was going to grow hair inside the palm of my hands. I'm like, really? Well, it didn't stop me because, again, I was an incredibly curious child. But these are like universal messages that a lot of people have grown up with. And not to mention that the shame that was distilled in many people as children to not touch themselves, to disassociate their genitals from the rest of their body. It's just incredible. Again, they didn't have social media back then. So how did the same messaging get around to all these different countries who pretty much have heard comments like that? And I'm just always amazed at this.
That's a good question. And I mean, I have my idea about it, but since we're not really talking about religion, and let's not get into this. But
well, yeah, that definitely plays a huge role, because I always say that the original sin is actually not the original sin, it's the original blessing. And as soon as we switch the two, we completely start looking at sexuality in a very wholesome way. It no longer becomes dirty. It no longer becomes part of our guilt, part of our shame, and all this baggage that we carry between our legs. It actually becomes an original blessing, which in turn becomes sacred and free.
But I'm also noticing, just talking to people around it, and I feel like people are becoming more open and more vocal also. And what you said, also like in different countries, and both men and women, and they could be in all kind of relationship, traditional, open, mixed, whatever it is, whatever works, right? And there is this collective curiosity about the subject. There is much more experimentation, and I was surprised to learn also about things that are becoming just much more open also. And funny.
And mainstream too.
Exactly. It's kind of funny, talking to friends sometimes, and they start sharing stories, and I go, I know you for 10 or 15 years. We never spoke about it. And then the person will be, you never asked, right? No.
And you never asked, because 10, 15 years ago, as you know, the energy globally was so dense that it was not appropriate to ask.
Exactly. Exactly. And also, like, what I'm seeing that, and I think it's probably like, tell me if it was for you, when we talk about the guilt and shame and all of those things, like, I definitely know, like, in my mind, even like 10 or 15 years ago, probably, if I would, think about people who are very like sexually explicit and like really, go for it and very experiential and do things and do them differently and really, kind of test boundaries with that stuff. I think maybe about 10, 15 years ago in my mind, I was thinking, well, they are weird. You know what I mean? Like, something is really off. It's sort of off the norm, whatever the norm is. And to my greatest surprise, 10, 15 years later, when I just look around in the society and when these conversations come up, and if people sort of trust, and it could come up in business settings, it could come up, in some kind of conversation with family, friends. It could come up when you do, babysitting for kids and other moms say something. So it's like absolutely normal daily activities we already do. And then it just, the sex comes up as the conversation, let's say. And then what I'm learning actually, that people who are adventurous and open-minded and experiential, they're just really interesting people. They do cool jobs, they live interesting life. They are, and they are also, they look better, they look healthier because they are more vital. There's more vitality around them. They are happier. Exactly. And they can just radiate, this energy, and just, much more fascinating in their mind and their life choices. And okay, I would say that most of them, from what I would know, probably to where society stands, they would be more unconventional when it comes to relationship choices.
Yes.
Like, for example, and it actually goes both for men and women. I think traditionally it was more men, but now I also find more women who say that they are not sure they want to settle for a traditional relationship, or they are not sure they want to be with one partner. Or if they are settling with someone, then they still want to have sexual openness in whatever agreement or configuration it is. Or they want to date several people at the same time. Or they want to date a girl and a boy and someone else, And so it's really interesting how massively it's actually changing.
Thank goodness, because my God, that, it's almost like whenever I think about these things, it's almost like, okay, we've tried it the other way. We've tried the whole hierarchy. We've tried the whole patriarchy and all of these things. We tried. And there was a time and place for that. And it worked for many people. As some people were incredibly miserable and all of that, and they couldn't come out and be so free about it. But now, because the energy is shifting, and in 15 years ago, I will never forget this. Maybe it was 17 years ago, when I used to tell just conventional people that I was doing yoga, they actually thought I was in a cult. And this was only 17 years ago. Right? Yeah. So there is just so much that has shifted since then. Well, yoga has become mainstream. Even third world countries now have yoga studios and for people to go and practice, including meditation. It has become incredibly mainstream, whereas before, meditation was not even in our lexicon in the West, right? It was just something that monks did somewhere in a monastery. Mm-hmm. And between health, wellness, between yoga, between meditation, between spirituality, what is the part of the self that still remains taboo and unexplored? It's our sexuality. But everything else has taken off and has become mainstream, except the most important part of ourselves and our expression. And it's finally changing. We finally have, if I started my project, Confident Lovers, 10 years ago, it would have tanked. It would not have the same amount of audience. It wouldn't have the same amount of curiosity or openness. But that's finally shifting because the energy of the world is shifting, because now people are finally breaking out of these chains and they just want and this is a question I ask a lot. What are people looking for, especially when it comes to gender conversations, right? Because all of this stuff now is starting in America. And I always I want to know what the underlying tone is. Why are there so many all of a sudden gender conversations happening? And ultimately, it's like these people have existed the whole time. They've just never been given a voice. But ultimately, what they're seeking is freedom. Yes. They just want to be included in society because they've been excluded for so long that they've never had a voice. And a lot of them went into drugs, went into prostitution and all these things because they just couldn't find their place in the world because everybody outcasted these people. And it's not like they've never existed. They've existed for as long as humanity has existed. They've just never been included.
And I mean, if we really weave into a spiritual angle, then of course, if we start looking like at scriptures and what has been happening very long time ago in countries like India,
yes,
and things that were going to the temples where women were naked at the temple, and it was a common fact, right? And there were many practices that have been done back then. And also, I mean, even with Christianity and Jesus, I mean, there are all kind of theories about that, including
Mary Magdalene.
Including that Mary Magdalene, and the apostles were a tantric group, right? And it's very hard to say yes or no, but there is, I mean, I looked at the evidence and it looks, very reasonable to what the reasons why and how it could possibly be. So we don't really know what was happening, but then definitely we could say that our society was more sexually liberal very long time ago. And then it got shut down for several centuries. And then it feels like it's coming back again, this wave. And
it has to, because this is the era of divine feminine. So it has to come back with a divine feminine, right? Because of all the flow and the expression and just giving birth to life. How can it can't be stuck in being rigid anymore.
Exactly. And it was interesting for me when I really have deep, honest conversations with people who are sexually adventurous and they want to do things, and
explore.
Exactly. But then it's also interesting what you say about freedom. Very often what I hear that they say that their parents were very controlling and they would control almost all areas of their life. Like they would control everything, it would be very high expectation at school, very high expectation at home. And so there was no space for the mind to be free. And then the only area where they felt that parents had no control was sex. And that's why they went into this, which makes me then wonder, let's say, about culture like Japan, for example, right? Which is very kind of, you would say, maybe controlling and maybe even rigid a little bit in sort of social areas. And at the same time, it's one of the most famous one with the kinky sex part, because people need to have an outlet. And so that's, to me, always fascinating to see, if we just relax the control and the constraint, the mind also then relaxes and things become more normal. And the more sort of it is the forbidden fruit, the more it is shameful, the more it is not okay to do, the more mind just goes in this direction. And people sometimes don't make good choices and not safe choices.
Oftentimes.
Right? So it's
oftentimes they don't make good choices. Oftentimes they don't make good choices and they actually end up hurting others who are more free because they're coming from a completely different place than the person who they're engaging with. And that's unfortunate. And that's one of the things I would love to be a voice for change, because we have to start having mature conversations and respectful conversations about sexuality, which is not the case right now, because we're coming out of this years of just restriction and taboo and shame and guilt. And we have to go through the wave of a lot of people, like you said, have gone through the extremes of sexual expressions and they don't make smart choices. But there's also a collective healing that needs to take place first for us to be able to have mature and respectful conversations. Because one of the key things about that is a lot of people do carry shame and guilt and anxiety and performance. Like for me, performance and sexuality should never go into the same sentence because sex is not about performing. Sex is about feeling. It's about connecting. And porn is about performance. There's camera angles. There's directors telling you what to do. Okay, come now and, take 10 or whatever. That's performance. But in the bedroom, when you're connecting with someone else, that is absolutely not a performance. And oftentimes, one of the major things that I see is how people are not able to relax and into pleasure because their body is so tight. And this one of the biggest, I think one of the biggest things that I see with women, aside from the fact that they're not able to orgasm, is how much pain they actually feel during sex. And I always have to ask, where does that come from? And a lot of it is actually cultural programming, because you've disassociated a part of your body that's not, that where you wrapped it in shame and guilt and whatever else that you were told as a child that you accepted because you were so impressionable and you didn't know any better. So what that has created is a clamp in the pelvic area, and including the vaginal opening, it just clamped where it has a hard time opening to anything that needs to be inserted where it can actually feel like pleasure. And that's one of the things that has happened in the last several years, where a lot of women are actually feeling pain where there should be feeling pleasure. And that's one of the things I mean when I say a healing that needs to take place is on a body level. One of the things that I always also like to say is you can't understand sex. You need to learn how to feel sex. And what's stopping a lot of people from really feeling the depth of sexuality is shame, guilt, anxiety, fear, performance.
Yes.
And trauma.
Exactly. And then I also feel that kind of logically brings us to a conversation about tantra, which also like the whole other conversation then. And that's what people are trying to do, because that's why tantra is also so popular these days, and anything kind of is being sold in the name of tantra. But fundamentally, it's largely around sexual deconditioning and sexual healing. Most of the tantric stuff which is offered, it is actually not what traditional tantra meant it to be at all, because it was meant to be a path to enlightenment. And now it is just simply path to pleasure, or, letting go of shame, being okay to be seen, being okay to be accepted, and being able to have this connection. And like, I know, like just also we're talking among tantric teachers, that one of the key points, it's exactly what you just said, Christina, that one of the biggest teachings that people receive is actually how to be intimate with each other. It's way before any sort of action even happens. How do you actually create an intimate space where you're not afraid to be intimate with another human being? And then, you see what happens.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people just come with fear and baggage, and they're so restricted. And that's why the connection can't take place. When you're free and playful and just full of life, that's one of the areas that you're also comfortable in. There's no insecurities that come up when you're in that type of a state. But yeah, being rigid and your body ends up actually building armor and blockages when you're so just rigid about things.
Okay, so I feel that we had like a really, a deep dive into describing what is happening, and just to acknowledge it to people who are listening or watching. It could be triggery to some, like sometimes like it could be triggery, and it could be that, let's say maybe a person who is listening right now is feeling that. There could be maybe some shame or guilt around sex, or some blockages in the body, or pain, what you describe, or maybe not fully being able to be in the intimate space, with the other human being. So let's talk a little bit about what can be done about it. Right? So
yes, the solutions, my favorite, the solutions. Yes, let's create the sexual future that we want to see.
Exactly. I love it. Let's create a sexual future we want to see. I love that. Should go with the episode. So what can we advise people?
So the first thing that I say to clients, let's say when they're wrapped in shame, guilt, anxiety, and all of this, I understand it's a very visceral feeling, right? Like it's in your body. All of this you're feeling, especially the pain and all of the stuff you're feeling in your body. So the question is, what can we do to be more free in our body? And the first thing is, I know I'm starting in the mind, but it's to leave the past where it belongs, right? This is, let's just say, for example, if it's cultural conditioning that you received as a child, you have to forgive your parents because their level of consciousness was not at the level of consciousness that it is for some parents who are progressive, like your mother, who was very progressive.
Maybe she was too progressive, but yes, that there has to be boundaries to things.
Okay, so maybe she was, too progressive for her time. Let's just say. I understand what you're saying as well. And, So the thing is to leave the past where it belongs, forgive your parents, forgive them for what they didn't teach you, and thank them for what they didn't teach you. Because I definitely would not want to have learned about sexuality through my parents, who were equally, we just didn't know any better, basically. I mean, what were they reading back in their days? Nothing. Mm-hmm. So thank them for not teaching you about sexuality, because you have a whole clean slate here and you get to learn this on your own. You get to go with all the information that's available to us now from everything that we have access to, from books to workshops, to YouTube videos, to blogs, to all the sexual teachers that are out there. That's where you start, because in order to free yourself, there's some information first that you have to work on the mind. There's some ideas about sexuality that you have to change. And you just have to mentally first free that rigid thinking of what sexuality is. And then you're able to start with the body. So you find a body worker, let's say if it's shame or trauma or whatever it is that you're trying to heal, a somatic body worker who can work in that part of the region, a trusted body worker. And you find someone like that and you work with them and you tell them what the problem is for them to be able to offer a solution. Because what they have to do is they have to help you with breathing exercises, with massages and all of these things to help you release the trauma, release the shame, release the guilt. And that has to happen on a visceral level. It can't just happen in the mind. You can't just wake up one day and all of a sudden you're just free of guilt. And some people can, but very few. Oftentimes it's a very visceral experience that's deep inside the body that needs to be released. And sometimes that can also happen with plant medicine. I know a lot of people who have had incredible healing experiences with ayahuasca mushrooms, but in a very safe, contained environment. Again, there's always a shadow aspect to all of this. So finding the right person, finding the right circle is always, always key. And the other, once you get to the path of healing and you're able to heal those things and to release them out of your body, then an entire new horizon opens up. Then you start asking yourself questions. What does sexuality mean for me? What type of sexual experiences do I want to have? What have I fantasized? Do I even want to experience that type of fantasy? And you really start the self-inquiry about your sexuality and your body and how you want to present yourself to the world. And sometimes you don't know the answers to that. So you have to go and have some experiences with caution to be able to find the type of sexual expressions that you're looking for and to see what's right for you.
Absolutely. And I feel what is also important is to start gently.
Oh, yes.
So because that's one of those areas where.
1 second, I have to turn on a light because it just got dark here.
Go ahead, do that.
Okay, I'm back.
I wish you have done it earlier. Now I can see you better.
I know. No, I know. I just got so caught up in the conversation. I was like, wait, I
good. So then the other things which needs to be remembered, because the body, what you said, stores all this, the guilt and the shame and all of those things, that when we are actually going into, let's say, sexual liberation, I think, and I know it's definitely true for women. So now tell me also if it is true for men. But from what I spoke with my friends, they say yes. So it is very often that the traumas can be released, or some kind of memories from the past come in, right? So let's say people go somewhere and they have a really intense, amazing, like very engaged sex that maybe haven't had in a long time.
Yes.
And it was great, and it was an amazing night, and it could happen right there on spot towards the end, or it could happen the next morning when a person wakes up in tears and goes, what is happening? It was so amazing yesterday, and today is all horrible, and feels shame and guilt and memories triggered again. Do you know what I mean? And it's really hard.
Absolutely. But that's why, like, before you get to sexual liberation, you have to first do the work on yourself for sexual healing before you get to the liberation part. Because when you're trying to heal something, or when you're if you immediately go to sex, there will be parts of you that will be triggered, and you're not going to have a framework of how to handle that. You might go into depression. You might go into sadness. You might go into all sorts of whatever emotion comes up for you. But that's why it's important to work with somebody continuously until you feel viscerally in your body that a healing has taken place. And I'll give you an example. One of my friends, who I absolutely dearly love, he's incredibly skilled at trauma release from the body, including by doing a yoni massage as well as doing a lingam massage. But he has more trainings and more certificates on healing the body than I can even count. He's just amazing. And I remember him one time. We went out to dinner when I was in town, and he showed up to dinner, and I can see from his body language that he's just shaken up. He's not in his, he's not in his confident self. He's not relaxed. He's just very shaken up. And I was like, "Are you okay? What's happening with you? You just feel like you just saw a ghost." And he said, I had one of the most intense and weird sessions I've ever had. So there was a woman who flew in to see him, to work with him for a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember what their agreement was, but she was experiencing trauma from childhood where, long story short, there was a whole bunch of doctors where she had to get a procedure at the age of 4. And there was a whole bunch of male doctors around that had to kind of give her this procedure. So she was incredibly traumatized from this in her vaginal area, right? So as an adult, as a 40-year-old woman, she gets to, let's say, from arousal level 10 being an orgasm, she gets to level 4 in her arousal level, and anger comes up for her. And she can't get past this anger. Right? Because as soon as she reaches a certain point of arousal, she gets angry. And she knows I have to do something about this, but what are the next steps? I don't know who to find to help me heal. So through friends or through podcasts, I'm not sure. She was able to find my friend. And my friend was able to, through a series of ETFs, which is the tapping and the yoni massage and all sorts of other bodily exercises, he was able to help her release this trauma. So I can't remember which session, let's say session number 7, she was able to release this trauma. And all of a sudden, she now can experience full arousal. So they're on the massage table. He's doing the massage and working her, guiding her to breathe. And all of a sudden, she gets past. She's no longer feeling anger. Now she's feeling aroused. And now she wants to have sex with him.
How did that
go? The person who's helping her heal and release the trauma, because she feels so aroused. Now he has incredibly high integrity. And this is one of the reasons why I love this guy, is because he will not cross that threshold, because he understands the boundaries of a healer and a patient. Mm-hmm. And he will absolutely not cross that threshold. And he says, what ended up happening was she was chasing me around the massage table trying to have sex with me. And I had to finally, just somehow restrain her and say, this is not going to happen. But she was so aroused, she completely lost her sense of anything, because this is a trauma that she was carrying in her body for so long, which now finally released. And she was just so happy that maybe it was a way of her, I don't know, I can't speak for her, and he was really distraught about this. So this happens, unfortunately, a lot in tantric communities.
Yes.
Where people show up for healing and they actually end up re-experiencing some sort of trauma or a different kind of trauma because the boundaries are not met, or because somebody oversteps the boundaries, where it's no longer a patient and a healer. The boundaries get crossed very quickly. And that's one of the things that I would really caution, because unfortunately, in this type of space, it does happen more often than not. And there's been so many cases that
Exactly. And I would actually add to this, honestly, if
like my friends who I care dear, let's say if a girlfriend or, a boyfriend, right, would come and ask for the recommendation, and I really care about people, I would tell them, if you want to experiment and if you feel like you are healed enough, just as you said, if you healed enough in your mind and in your body that you actually want to go and have experiences, go for sex parties and not tantra workshops, because at least it's clear. It's clean. It's clear. You know where you're going.
What you're there for.
You know what you're there for. There is no ambiguity. It's a very clear line about things. And in fact, when it is so explicitly clear, people are usually also very good at communicating boundaries.
Absolutely.
And the problem with the tantric space, and again, this is like the whole conversation of itself. There's just so many cases when they have been brutally breached. And I think, statistically, probably more men breaching towards women. But to your friend example, it is not the only way, because there are plenty of other ways when guys also shared that they felt very unsafe in the space of the female, were just very aggressively sexually hungry, and men didn't know what to do with that, So I think it kind of goes both ways.
It goes both ways. I will be the first to admit that I am absolutely currently the way that Tantra is being taught and doing. I'm just not a fan of any of those communities. I've been in a couple and I can't stand them.
Yeah, no,
I need to shy away from them. Because I just see like the woundedness, and I see that it's more of a power grab. They've never been fully healed, and now they're trying to be the teacher or the savior for other people. And no. Absolutely not. That's a great point. Go to sex parties, because at least you know what you're getting, versus a tantric workshop, because there's just too much ambiguity, too many wounded people who've never really healed whatever trauma it is that they're carrying, and they're bringing it into the circle and calling it healing when it's not.
Exactly. And there are actually very few, at least I personally know people who I would trust when it comes to Tantra, Same. So really it's like, I personally, again, it's the conversation where I have my own big doubts about the whole community in many countries, and I have tried many things. And the joke is, from time to time, I even lead sometimes myself, tantric things for people.
Yeah.
But I learned now I'm doing it more and more for women only, because the moment it starts and then it becomes more about healing a feminine. It's what you said. So it becomes kind of part of the healing where, so it's about letting go of the shame and being comfortable with your body. It's safe in terms of it's you with yourself in the space of other women. So it's like a different level of education. But for the mixed things and call it Tantra, I'm like, well, call it what it is. Call it sex party.
Exactly.
Don't confuse the terms.
Right. I totally agree. But the one thing I would suggest is, it's first to really understand you before you go into those type of circles. It's to really just do a self-inquiry, ask a lot of questions about your sexuality, and see what type of messages have you received as a child? Because it's a two-way street. There's the authority figure who's telling you certain things about your body and shaming you and giving you all this guilt. But because you're young, because you're impressionable, you have to believe it. So what if as an adult, you completely just give that information back to the person who gave it to you? That's one way of freeing yourself of a belief system that does not belong to you.
Very good point. And I know we are kind of coming, to the time of our conversation and you have to go soon. So I just would like maybe just, 2 more minutes to stretch, if that's okay.
Sure. We could do 5. I'm good with 5.
Good. And I just feel, another important point, because we do live right now in a time with very active dating culture. There are probably more apps than ever, and there are a lot of kind of easy hookups. And there is sort of not much responsibility also, around those things often, and sort of kind of people use it very frequently. And so I just would like also to sort of have this conversation about like a human responsibility towards each other, so that we understand, right? Like in a way, let's say if you go on a date tonight, and I think it applies both to men and women. So
absolutely.
Because having sex can trigger a person and could lead them into traumas and could lead them into vulnerable emotional space. Yep. And yes, we could look at it and say, well, it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem. But yet if you actually having sex with someone, it is, in a way you are in this very intimate connection. And I feel that also a part of the adult conversation, even in a very modern, no strings attached hookup culture that we're experiencing right now, that I feel that there has to be some decency and honor and just human compassion towards each other to give each other space and support to land after, which
does not happen.
Which is not happening. That's exactly what I mean. And I hear and see it everywhere. And, maybe historically it was men who were blamed for sort of be less considerate towards women, but now women becoming exactly like that. So they are also, often in this way interacting with the guys. So I feel it kind of goes both ways.
Definitely. In modern culture, it definitely goes both ways. It's no longer, and that's the problem, because there's no more personal responsibility, right? You just try to throw it on the other person or you walk away from it. I mean, ghosting was another word that hasn't been used in the last 5 years. This is something new, which I think is the worst thing that you can do to someone is to all of a sudden stop replying with no reason or no explanation in terms of why, and you just leave them hanging. And that's truly like one of the worst things that you could do to another human being is to ghost them and not tell them why, or or have a closure.
And it often comes from, a personal fear and insecurities.
But then you're never able to deal with you're never able to deal with whatever conversation that seems hard for you. So you're constantly running away from it. And then this ends up in your work, in your family life, in your relationships. It goes everywhere because you do not have that power, that decency to have this difficult conversation with another human being. And this is what I love actually about our culture, the Soviet culture. We have 20 different difficult conversations a day because we need to. Because we don't know any other way. We don't run away from stuff.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So I guess that's probably when I'm just listening to you, sharing it. I love our conversation today, very spicy, very hot, very controversial for many. I understand, right? And so at the same time, very important because we have to heal it individually and collectively. And just what you shared, the part of that, having those very healthy adult conversations about it is, one step towards this collective future where we're at peace with our sexuality. And to me, it does start with treating each encounter, however short or long it is, with care.
With care. Yes.
Exactly.
Leave the other person better than you found them. Exactly. Unfortunately, in modern culture, with the whole dating and hookups and all this stuff, is that I feel like people just try to take from each other. It's no longer about receiving, right? It's no longer about this beautiful dance between each other. It's about what can I take from this person? Oh, and that's just horrible because I don't think a lot of people realize, but they're creating more trauma by behaving that way and by bringing that to the relationship or whatever connection it is. And you're creating a lot more problems in the future because you could be wounding someone without knowing.
Absolutely. So guys and girls and everyone else, let's, be responsible about those things and kind of level up our game since we are playing in an adult area right here. So if you want to be called an adult, then act like one, right?
Yes.
Take responsibility for your action and, treat other human beings with love and decency. I think they're just very important part. And yep. Christina, thank you so much. I mean, it's always great talking with you.
I know. I miss our hikes. We have the best conversations.
Yes, very great hikes in Singapore. Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you again and welcoming you here. And
likewise.
For everyone who wants to connect with Christina, we're going to add, all the links in the description. So make sure you check description in the podcast or in the YouTube, so you can find more about her. And
my YouTube channel got shut down, unfortunately.
It's our YouTube channel for the video.
Oh, your YouTube.
So
Okay, got it.
About you and yes,
got it.
Okay. You feel that reaching out.
And also be brave, to have a conversation. If there's something you want to say, then say it in the comments, start the conversation, tag us, and then let's see where it leads us. And yes, to the most important, let's create a different future collectively when it comes to our sexuality.
Yes, more meaning and just more care.
Yes. So thank you.
Thank you.
A gentle reminder that this is not a regular podcast, because here we have no rules and no scripted questions. All conversations are spontaneous, unfiltered, and real, with people from all over the world, regardless of their race, religion, nationality, skin color, language, or social circumstances. The intention for this podcast is to showcase the infinite variety of how human beings think and what they do to create happiness, fulfillment, self-realization, health, wealth, legacy, and overall a truly spectacular life. Did you enjoy the interview? Feel free to share this episode with friends, subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And remember, you are the master of your own life.